This is Untitled, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
The one that everybody is always interested in is E.T. And I actually have the distinction of having signed the scrap ticket to write them all off and run them through the crusher. And he calls me on Monday morning in a panic. And he goes, "Jeffrey, where's all my stuff? I'm at the warehouse and it's empty. All the stuff is gone." 100,000 square foot warehouse that was packed to the gunnels with manufacturing equipment on Friday, and on Monday morning it was empty.
I'm Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Jeff Osorio was manager of financial planning and cost accounting at Atari from 1981 through 1984. He was responsible for establishing cost accounting and financial planning functions with a staff of 11 and an annual department budget of more than $1 million. This interview took place September 22nd, 2015, a day that I apparently was having microphone problems, but Jeff sounds fine, and that's the important part. How did you get your job at Atari?
I was actually recruited in by someone I had worked with for Xerox. So I had worked with a Xerox company coming right out of school, and worked with a Xerox internal auditor, and he actually went to Atari as a director and then recruited me in.
So were you hired straight into that management position?
Yeah. I went in to what was then HCD, the Home Computer Division, as the cost accounting manager. And basically, we were spinning the Home Computer Division out of the game division. And so I came in and had one person basically, and they handed me, 14 or 15 open requisitions and said, build the department. So there was quite a bit of transition, and I think I wound up bringing in 8 or 10 more people into the division after that.
Wow. So, okay, first of all, what is cost accounting and what is a cost accounting manager?
Cost accounting basically does all of the inventory management and setting standard costs for products, analyzing cost of goods sold. So we were looking at what it cost to make the product, and how we were tracking and managing the inventory for the manufacturing production group. We did spending analysis, manufacturing overhead rates, anything related to the production of the product, basically, we were covering.
How did you set the cost? I mean, how did that process work? I had read for instance, over at Tandy, when they were doing their computers, they basically started with the cost and tried, okay, this is the most we're willing to spend on parts. And I don't think that's how it works with Atari. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so fundamentally, it's pretty straightforward. In any manufacturing environment where you're actually manufacturing a product, you have what's called a bill of material, which is the list of ingredients, if you will, that goes into the product. So it says, I need this part, I need this quantity of it, and it has this relationship to, where it goes and how you assemble it. So if you think about a recipe for a cake, right? You've got a list of ingredients and you've got quantities associated with it, and then you've got the directions that say, sift the flour, add the sugar, add 2 eggs, blah, 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 bake for 350 degrees. And so the bill of material is the list of ingredients. The process routing are the instructions. And so based on the bill of material and the process routings, you're going to set a standard cost. So for all of the ingredients, all the parts that you're going to buy, the purchasing group goes out and we'll get quotes on all of those parts, right? And then do that part of it. And then for the process side, you have the amount of time it takes to perform each step. You have a labor rate for each step. You have overhead rates for each step. And so you can calculate the total cost of the product that way. Now, a lot of the times you look at a product and say, okay, I want to sell it for this, therefore I have to make it for that, right? So that what you're selling it for is more than what it costs you to make it, obviously. In some cases, though, if you have a captive market, right, it's whatever it costs to make it, and then you mark it up from that and figure out what you're going to sell it for. So one is a price minus profit. The other one is a cost plus to get to a price point. But either way, you're going to generate the cost for the product.
So when you got there, it sounds, I think they already knew what was going to go into this machine, correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And as I understand it, originally the price of the Atari 800 was supposed to be $800, and the 400 was supposed to be $400, and that's not how it worked out. It ended up costing more than $1,000. So can you talk about why the cost changed, or what you remember about that process?
I don't remember how they set the original target cost for the product. Obviously, it would have been before I got there. But I think part of it is going to be related to the volume that you're going to produce, right? So the more you produce, the cheaper the parts are, because you're getting economies of scale both on purchasing and on manufacturing. So depending on how many you make and where you make it, it's going to determine what the cost of the parts or the cost of the product is. So at the time, I'm thinking later, we had 8 manufacturing facilities. So we had a manufacturing facility in Sunnyvale, California, one in El Paso, Texas, one in Taiwan, one in Puerto Rico, one in Ireland, a joint venture in Hong Kong, a joint venture in Singapore, and a joint venture in Brazil. But typically when you're launching a product, you're going to manufacture it in one place first and make sure you've got the production process down before you try and replicate that someplace else.
So you said you built a department, and you started with some people, and you hired a bunch more. What were all those people doing for you?
Basically, they were broken down into the functionality. So I had a couple people that were working on purchase part costs. I had a couple people that were working on labor tracking. I had a couple people that were working on overhead rates. So basically, you just took the functionalities that you're looking for, and you were assigning a number of people associated with each one of those to track each one of the cost components.
We've been talking generally about the job, but tell me a story specifically about Atari, about a problem that occurred or an interesting thing that happened as you were trying to manage all this.
Well, I think the one that everybody is always interested in is E.T. And I actually have the distinction of having signed the scrap ticket to write them all off and run them through the crusher. So every time, they just had an article that came out about a bunch of Atari cartridges that they found in New Mexico. Yeah. What I remember is I thought most of them went through a crusher and went into a landfill in Mexico, which is my recollection. But the thing about the E.T. game that I saw is I actually got an early copy of it, kind of a manufacturing pre-release thing, and gave it to my niece. And I knew we were in trouble with that game when she called me one day at work, and she wasn't very old. I don't remember how old she was, but she said, "Uncle Jeff, I got all the parts, and I can't make them phone home." And I went, "We are so screwed, because if people can't make the game work, they're going to get frustrated and throw it in the trash." And that's pretty much what happened. The game had a lot of hype associated with it, and then when it came out, it really wasn't playable. And I think that was one of the early mistakes. I think the other one that we saw all the time was, if you had the best coin-op game, then it translated really well into the home games and into the computer games. And the one that Atari really missed out on was Donkey Kong. And so Donkey Kong was developed by somebody else, and it hit the market, and obviously was very popular. And the company, Atari, wasn't able to buy that game or the rights to that game. And I think that's when things really started to fall apart. So when I got there, the company was $1 billion company. The second year I was there, it was a $2 billion company. And the third year, we were doing a plan at $600 million. And so I mentioned that at that point, I didn't mention, but we had restructured the company from product divisions to functional divisions. So instead of having coin-op, home games, and home computing, we went to a sales division, a manufacturing division, and distribution, and so forth. And so that's when I was in manufacturing planning for the manufacturing division, and we had 8 production facilities that I mentioned. And when the volume dropped, we had enough capacity to build the full year's production in Puerto Rico in 1 quarter, and we had 7 other manufacturing facilities. So I spent probably the last 6 months I was there doing plant shutdown analysis, trying to figure out what plants to keep open and what plants to close based on the volume that we had. So there was a lot of come bets on the volume continuing to go up and to the right, and when that collapsed, there was so much infrastructure that it was hard to keep the company going.
Wow. So you're the guy who's going in there basically going like, all you people are going to lose your jobs.
Yeah, unfortunately, and it was kind of an interesting process because the company had one vice president for each manufacturing facility, and then there was a senior vice president of manufacturing. So I worked primarily with the SVP of manufacturing and the VP for Sunnyvale. That's where we were located in the headquarters. And so when we realized what was going on, we started doing this plant shutdown analysis, and we'd go in and say, well, we should close plant A and B. And the guys in all the other plants would say, no, you have the wrong assumptions for my plant. Change this and change this. And so then I would go from A and B to, B and C. And then A and B would come back and say, no, you got the wrong assumptions for my plant. So we went through months of going through this thing, and the software to do the modeling wasn't as sophisticated as it is today. So we were basically running giant VisiCalc models that, when you hit calculate, you could go out and have a smoke and come back in a half hour, the thing would still be calculating. But now you could do it almost instantaneously. But we were sitting there one night I was sitting there with my team, and we were going through it, and I said, well, if this was our company, what would we do? And we kind of talked about it for a bit, and the scenario that we came back was we would put everything we could into Taiwan. We would put the overflow into El Paso, and we would close everything else. And so we ran it through the model, and the thing was cranked away, and it came out better than any of the scenarios that we had created. So I called my boss at home and said, look, I think we got the answer. We're going to work all night. Call a meeting for tomorrow morning. We're going to be ready to review this thing. And so my guys cranked all night. We ran all the numbers, created all the slides for the presentation. They get the manufacturing VPs together in the morning. We walk in, my team and I go in, and I walk through the presentation and say, this is what we want to do, blah, 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 lowest scenario of all the ones that we had talked to. And I went through all the numbers, and there was like dead silence in the room. And the senior VP of manufacturing was sitting at the back of the room, and he looked at me and he goes, what the fuck are you guys talking about? Right? You have no idea what you're talking about. Why are you wasting my time? And just proceeded to ream me and my team completely out. And my financial boss, a real gem of a guy, basically threw us under the bus and said, yeah, I told them I wasn't going to work, but they insisted, and yada, yada, yada. So we walked out of the room kind of with our tails between our legs, and my guys all looked at me and said, "Okay, we're all leaving." In fact, we got to the point where we would meet on Friday afternoon to see where everybody was interviewing the next week, so we didn't interview against one another. And it was really a mess. And so, shortly after that, the company was basically given away to Jack Tramiel and his son. And basically the deal was they basically took over the company for stock and a note, and the note was forgiven. So they basically gave the company away. And so my team and I, we'd all moved on to different jobs, so we kept in touch. And about 6 or 8 months later, I guess, one of the guys called me and said, "Hey, did you read the Journal this morning?" And I said, "No." He goes, "Go to page whatever." And there's an article about how Jack Tramiel and his son took over Atari, and with this innovative strategy by loading everything into Taiwan and putting the overflow in El Paso and closing everything else, they had basically restructured the company into profitability, and they were going to start making money again. And it's like, somebody found our plan. I'm sure they were cleaning out files or whatever, and blew some dust off of a folder and go, "Hey, this is pretty good." So the thing that we had recommended, over a year before was actually what was implemented and actually worked. So that was, we always took pride in that and said, yeah, we had the right answer, and nobody listened to us.
It's kind of bittersweut, huh? I couldn't decide if you were going to say that was heartbreaking or
really
wonderful.
Was. Especially with all we went through, like you mentioned, putting that many people out of work and closing facilities, and none of that stuff is ever fun.
Yeah. So going back a little bit, tell me a little bit about, let's see if we can pinpoint some memories or something about the setting prices for the home computer products. Was it you doing software as well as hardware? Were you doing cartridges?
Well, there was pretty much a market rate for the cartridges. People. They look at those things and say, yeah, people are willing to pay, $24.99 for the best game or whatever it is, and they're willing to pay, X number of dollars. So most of that was market-based pricing. The computers, the marketeers did more research on that, but, the real issue with selling the computers, we always believed that the Atari 800 computer was a better computer than I don't know, it was the Apple II or the Lisa at the time, but was clearly a better personal computer. The problem with it was that it was marketed just like the home games. And so it was the same distribution channel, basically the same packaging, side by side on the shelf. So people didn't really perceive the value. They saw it as a big game console or a fancy game console, right? And didn't see the value of the product when it was marketed and sold directly next to, I think by that point it was the 7200, the game console.
7800, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so it just didn't fly. And the packaging was exactly the same. It was a silver box, if I remember right. And, other than the picture in the box, you couldn't tell that you were buying something radically different. I think the other thing that really hurt was the software. The things you could do with a home computer at the time were limited. There was word processing, there was VisiCalc, there was a graphics program, except you couldn't print them out, right? If you did a chart or a graph on the screen, you couldn't print it out. And so, you could basically do it. If we want to do a chart or graph, basically we would do it on the screen, and then somebody would take a Polaroid of it, and then you'd Xerox it. I mean, it was not great technology. And so the utility of having a computer at home really never came into play. And they talked about all these things. Well, you can control the lights in the house with it and turn them on remotely, and you can do this and you can do that. But everything was hardwired and slow. Mm-hmm. And so, other than working at home, there wasn't a lot of utility associated with it. And they, kept talking about, cookbook programs and, recipe programs and all this other kind of stuff. And you probably have a list of all the software that was offered, but there wasn't anything that really made it valuable to have at home. The internet didn't exist, right? So it wasn't like you could do research on it. They had, I think there were programs where, they had like a dictionary and a thesaurus and some of those things that were basically just on disk, but the utility wasn't there, and so the demand wasn't there, and people looked at it as just expensive game consoles. Now, there were better games for the 800 computer that I don't think were ever released. We actually had a game in the office that was called Jawbreaker, which was just a fancier version of Pac-Man, which was a great game, but I don't think it was ever released. The computer versions of Centipede and some of those games were a lot better because they were a lot faster and the graphics were better. But again, it was a lot of money at the time to pay for something to play games on.
Jawbreaker actually was released, but by a different company. And
there you go.
Yeah.
It was. We had copies of Jawbreaker all over the office, and used to use them all the time.
It's ironic that you were playing what was probably a pirated version of some other company's Pac-Man clone instead of Pac-Man.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. Well, and actually, in the Sunnyvale buildings, there were coin-op games in all of the lobbies, and they were free. I mean, you just go down and play them. And then in the headquarters building, they had a game room that was probably, 3,000 square feet or more, that just had every coin-op game that the company made in it, and you could actually rent it for like birthday parties or book it for birthday parties and stuff like that, and it was all free. So all the games were there, and it was really cool.
All right, so for cartridges, market pricing, and what else do I need to know about pricing of accessories or peripherals or if you were coming out with, I don't know, the Atari Lab or some sort of weird product that didn't have a market price, was it just based on cost base?
Not usually. The marketeers would always tell you, well, this is what the customer is willing to pay, and whether they were doing that based on surveys or their own analysis or comparable products or whatever, most of it was market-based pricing. And the reality was, for the biggest profit margin was on the game cartridges because they were really cheap to make. And so if you could make those for $2 a pop and sell them for $25, you do that all day long, and you take a very slim margin on the console itself. And so that was pretty much the way the thing was marketed. It's like a razor blade market, right?
Sure.
The blades are cheap, but you buy them forever. Peripherals, they would have a slight markup on them, but again, they weren't designed to be very profitable. They were designed to enhance the value of the system. Mm-hmm. So if you were buying a 5 1/4 inch drive or something like that attached to it, was those peripherals were there to sell software, not to make money on the hardware.
Sure. Yeah. So you mentioned ET earlier, and I want to get back to this question. I've heard that they, and I don't know if you had anything to do with this, but I've heard that they actually manufactured more ET cartridges than there were consoles to play them on. How does a thing like that happen?
I don't know if that's true or not, but it's possible. One of the things you have to remember is that the data available at the time wasn't as accessible as it is today, right? With giant ERP systems and all those kinds of things. If you're running Oracle or SAP or something like that, you'd have access to all that information at your fingertips, and it's quite possible that somebody looked at the market size and said, yeah, you know what, we can sell this many game cartridges. I also think some of the game cartridges were plug compatible between the Atari systems and other systems. So if you were making them for a 7800, I believe that those cartridges were plug compatible with an Activision system or something else. So they might have been looking at the total market for those cartridges as opposed to just the Atari market for those cartridges. But it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, that's a function of working in marketing. Hey, we can sell a whole bunch of these things. Well, that's more than the game consoles exist. The other thing associated with that is a lot of times with siblings, right? Siblings don't share well. And so, you know, they got to have their own copy. So, you know, one can play, you know, I'm not going to let, you know, Bobby play my copy of Pac-Man. He's got to get his own. And, you know, again, they were cheap enough where, you know, people could go ahead and do that kind of stuff.
Huh.
I can't tell you the number of duplicate toys I had in my house when my sons were growing up because they each had to have their own one.
Okay, I don't know. That makes sense with me with Stretch Armstrong, but not with, I don't know, with a $30 game cartridge. But okay.
Yeah, well, you know, when you're a parent, and my sons are older now, but when your kids want something, you'll do anything. You know, stand in line and all that kind of stupid stuff to, you know, to get the thing that they want, and
right.
You know, people do it.
Yeah, that's true. What haven't I asked you about your time at Atari that I should have?
Well, like I said, it was a wild ride because, you know, when you go from $1 billion to $2 billion, you're not even steering the horse. You're trying to stay on it. And we were bringing in, you know, hundreds of people, and you know, a lot of companies in Silicon Valley have been through that. But there were recruiters that were working with the company that were bringing people in, and they would have silent partners. So one person would bring them into the company, and 8 months later or 9 months later, somebody else would take them out because the turnover was so high and the valley was growing so fast. So there were, it was really interesting. And when you get in a situation like that where you have high growth, high profitability, people get stupid about spending money. So, you know, the Silicon Valley, they always talk about the T-shirt culture, you know, where, you know, I got the job and I got, you know, a wardrobe that went along with it. So there were a lot of freebies that went on. There were a lot of crazy stuff that went on. Actually, in the home computer division, I had an executive who was taking his administrative assistant to the Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, she needed clothes for that. And he sent her down to Nordstrom's to get clothes. And she came back with like a $3,000 bill for clothes. And he turned in an expense report. And I rejected it. And, you know, the guy called me up and read me a new one. And, you know, and I'm a senior vice president and I can do this and that. And I said, that's fine. I'm not signing it. Take it to our CFO. And he took it to the CFO, and the CFO sent him out handing him body parts. So I guess he wound up eating the $3,000 worth of clothes for his assistant. There, you know, and so there were a lot of quirky things like that. Do you know about the fixed leaf? Have you ever heard about the fixed leaf?
No, I don't think I know what that is. Fixed leaf? Is that what you're saying?
So fixed leaf, yeah. So there was an executive dining room in the corporate headquarters that was in the middle of the building, and it really wasn't marked. You kind of had to know where it was, and it had you know, silverware and china and linen tablecloths and waiters and with gloves and all this other kind of stuff, right? Uh-huh. I got to go there a couple times when our manufacturing VPs were visiting. But they used to call it the fixed leaf because there were double doors that went into it, and one of the doors was a fixed leaf. The door didn't open, or you had to unlock it, release it from the inside. So people used to call the restaurant the Fixed Leaf because that was the only sign on the door, and that's how you knew where it was. Kind of like, what is it, Club whatever in Disneyland, the only place that serves alcohol.
Club 33, yeah.
Yeah, Club 33. So it was the Fixed Leaf was the equivalent of Club 33. Yeah, I guess. So we talked about shutting down businesses and the things that happen, and I had left the company, and they were shutting down a bunch of the operations in Sunnyvale. And so before I left, they actually held an employee auction and sale so employees could buy stuff. So I wound up buying a TV because we used TVs for monitors. And they were, file cabinets and plants. Basically, they were selling everything. But they took all of the manufacturing equipment, Ceratokes, carousel racks, and conveyor systems, and all kinds of equipment, and put it all in one warehouse. And so they had about 100,000 square feet that was full of manufacturing equipment, and they were going to inventory it and then list it for sale with brokers. And one of my good friends was responsible for that, so he had gotten all this equipment set up. They were getting ready to inventory it, and like I said, I had left the company at this point. And he calls me on Monday morning in a panic, and he goes, "Jeffrey, where's all my stuff?" And I go, "What do you mean, where's all your stuff?" He goes, "Where's all my stuff?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "I'm at the warehouse, and it's empty. All the stuff is gone." And so they had a 100,000 square foot warehouse that was packed to the gunnels with manufacturing equipment on Friday, and on Monday morning it was empty. And the building manager was gone, the security guy was gone, and the building was empty. And so fundamentally, as stuff was coming in, they must have been, figuring out what they were going to take and had trucks lined up. And so, the last truck came in on Friday, and then they started taking stuff out again, and on Monday morning the thing was empty. The only thing that was left was a forklift, and I don't think they had room for it on the last truck. Wow. And so basically it was just all stolen, and I don't know if they ever got any of that stuff back, but they cleaned out 100,000 square feet in a weekend.
Wow.
So it was kind of sad. I mean, and one of the marketing buildings was on the corner of was on Caribbean Drive in Sunnyvale. When they went to start laying off the marketing people were taking their computers and TV monitors with them, right? And the security guard said, "What are you doing?" Well, my manager said they could have this, and basically a fight broke out, and they had to call the police because all these people were trying to take the computers and TVs with them, things get crazy, and so it was really kind of sad to watch all of that unfold, and you're trying to make the best decisions you can for the investors and the shareholders and the people at the same time, but the impact of that is significant.
Yeah. Wow.
So what else can I tell you about? What can I help you about?
I don't have any more questions, so I'm fishing at this point because you seem to have super interesting stories. I just don't know what to ask to get them out of you. So,
how about at one point when they were cutting people and collecting stuff, they said, collect up all the extra office supplies out of everybody's desk when they leave, and send them to a central location, and that way, when you need office supplies, we'll just send you back what's already been bought. That was a memo that came out at one point, which actually wasn't a bad idea. Okay, so Ray Kassar was in charge of Atari for a point in time, right? When
yes.
It was owned by Warner. Okay. Mm-hmm. So one of my guys, a guy by the name of Mike Nolte, he was actually the guy who was there when I joined the company, and he was a really good soldier, and he was terrific at tracking purchase part costs. I mean, that was his job, and he lived and died by it, and he used to do a report every week on purchase price variance, the difference between what we were paying for components and what the standard cost for those components are, what we were supposed to be paying.
Mm-hmm.
And, Mike faithfully did his report every week and, send this thing off. And one day at lunchtime, I get a telephone call and looking for Mike Nolte. And I said, I'm sorry, it's at lunch. Can I take a message? Well, this is Ray Kassar. Well, how are you, Mr. Kassar, right? And he goes, well, I'd really like to talk to Mike Nolte about his purchase price variance report. And I said, well, is there a problem? I'm his manager. Is there a problem?
Mm-hmm.
No, there's no problem. I just want to talk to him about it. And he goes, will you have him call me when he comes back in? Right? And so I said, sure. So Mike comes back from lunch, and I go, Mike, you need to call Ray Kassar. He goes, what? I go, you need to call Ray Kassar. And he's got, you're kidding me. I said, no, he called about the purchase price. Well, what's the matter with it? Mike, there's nothing wrong with it. He just wants to talk to you. So Mike calls him from my office, and it wasn't a speakerphone at the time, but Mike's on the phone, and basically Ray Kassar wanted to call him and tell him what a good job he was doing on the purchase price variance report, and keep up the good work, and one of those types of thing. And my guy, is almost peeing himself because he's so scared about what's going to happen, right? And Ray just wants to call him up. And I mean, I don't think I saw him in a meeting once. I don't think, I talked to him on the phone like once, right? In the 3 years I was there, but it was kind of a weird thing. The other one I think was interesting is when we had a big management meeting. So they had all the managers in from all around the world, and they had this big set of meetings and a dinner and whatever. And we were at this big dinner, and some of the Atari executives had been fined or at least identified for potential insider trading. Mm-hmm. And they were making jokes about it at the dinner in front of all these managers. And I thought, and I was a young guy at the time, but I'm thinking about this going, okay, what kind of example does that set when the executives of the company have been accused of insider trading and are making jokes about it? I mean,
right.
It basically says that just do whatever you want, nobody cares. And so that was really, that was one of those kind of wake-ups for me. It's like, yeah, these guys will do whatever the hell they want because it's just all about the money.
Yeah.
So it's sad. It was a good product. There were a lot of interesting things that could have been done, and just some really poor strategic thinking. And Warner Communications didn't really understand the market well enough, and I think they bought it on the trends as opposed to any real market intelligence, and at the end of the day, that'll cost you.
Yeah. If you could send a message to the Atari computer users who are listening to this podcast, what would you tell them?
Oh, what would I tell them?
What would you tell them?
Wow. What would I tell them? We had a lot of fun making them. We had a lot of fun getting them to them, and I'm glad they still like the product after all these years. And we wish we could have made more and done a better job at it.
Awesome. Good answer. Thank you so much, Jeff.
That's great. Thank you very much.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.